The Valdorian Empire had always prided itself on thorough record-keeping. After all, when you've systematically conquered 14 star systems and eliminated 6 entire species, proper documentation becomes something of a necessity. Otherwise, how would one properly gloat at galactic conferences? The file, labeled Terra 3 Pest Elimination Protocol Completed, sat in the archives with all the bureaucratic satisfaction of a job well done. 50 standard years had passed since the Valdorians had declared Earth and its irritating inhabitants officially extinct. The paperwork was immaculate, the sterilization reports filed in triplicate, and the celebratory dinner had been absolutely divine. Case closed, species filed, moving on. Admiral Keth'var had been particularly proud of that operation back in his younger days. Humans, as it turned out, were remarkably easy to eliminate once you figured out their weakness for dramatic last stands and stirring speeches. A few orbital bombardments, some targeted bioweapons, and voila! No more pesky primates cluttering up perfectly good real estate. The Valdorians had even kept Earth as a mining colony, which was wonderfully ironic considering the former residents had been so protective of their little blue marble. Now, 5 decades later, Keth'var commanded the 3rd mining fleet with the sort of bored efficiency that comes from knowing you're the apex predator in a universe full of sheep. The Valdorians had evolved beyond the need for creativity or caution. When you possessed shields that could deflect small stars and weapons that could crack moons, why bother with imagination? Which made the current situation rather inconvenient. Sub-Commander Zixtal's voice carried that particular tone reserved for delivering news that would ruin someone's day. The mining crew on asteroid belt Gamma 7 has discovered something unusual. Keth'var didn't look up from his daily reports. After 40 years of command, very little qualified as genuinely unusual. Define unusual, Sub-Commander. Did they find another cache of those primitive Earth weapons? Because I thought we'd established that projectile firearms are museum pieces, not threats. Well, sir, they found a ship. Congratulations. Ships are not unusual in space. Shocking revelation, I know. Zixtal's mandibles clicked nervously. It's a human ship, sir. This time Keth'var did look up, his 4 eyes focused on his subordinate with the sort of attention usually reserved for unexploded ordnance. That's impossible. Humans have been extinct for 50 years. I should know. I helped kill them. Yes, sir. That's what makes this unusual. The derelict vessel floating in the shadow of asteroid mining platform 7 looked exactly like what one would expect from a species too stubborn to know when they were beaten. It was a patchwork of salvaged parts, jury-rigged systems, and what appeared to be held together by sheer bloody-mindedness and possibly duct tape. The humans had always been embarrassingly primitive in their engineering, preferring brute force solutions over elegant efficiency. Chief Mining Engineer Vexton examined the craft with the sort of professional disdain reserved for particularly offensive architecture. Typical human garbage construction, he reported over the comm. Hull plating is mismatched, the power signatures are completely erratic, and I'm detecting what appears to be organic coffee grounds in the filtration system. Coffee grounds? Keth'var's voice carried across the communication array with barely contained irritation. Yes, sir, apparently they use stimulant beverages as part of their life support recycling, primitives. What Vexton didn't mention, because he hadn't noticed, was that the ship's erratic power signatures were actually carefully modulated to appear random while maintaining perfect life support. The mismatched hull plating concealed sensor arrays that would have impressed even Valdorian engineers had they bothered to look closely. And the coffee grounds weren't contamination. They were part of an incredibly sophisticated atmospheric scrubbing system that had kept someone alive for exactly 50 years, 3 months, and 12 days. Commander Marcus Tank Rodriguez had been having the strangest dream. Something about alien voices speaking in clicking, chittering sounds that hurt his ears. Probably another nightmare about the day the sky caught fire and Earth went silent. He'd been having those dreams for however long he'd been asleep. The hibernation pod had been his own design, cobbled together from mining equipment, medical supplies, and a considerable amount of creative profanity. When the Valdorian bombardment began, Tank had made a command decision that was either brilliantly pragmatic or completely insane. If you can't fight them, and you can't beat them, you hide until they get bored and leave. 50 years was a long time to wait for someone to get bored. The pod's revival sequence activated with all the grace and subtlety of a garbage disposal having an argument with a blender. Tank's consciousness surfaced through layers of chemical fog and mechanical complaints, accompanied by the ship's computer informing him in its cheerfully British accent that his wake-up call was approximately 5 decades overdue, but who's counting? Status report, Tank croaked, his voice sounding like gravel in a cement mixer. Oh, marvelous timing as always, Commander, the computer replied with programmed sarcasm. We appear to have visitors, 3 of them to be precise. They're currently standing in our cargo bay discussing our primitive engineering in rather unflattering terms. Tank's eyes snapped fully open. Through the pod's viewing window, he could see 3 figures that definitely weren't human. They were tall, chitinous, and moving through his ship with the casual confidence of species that had never met anything that could meaningfully threaten them. That was about to change. The first Valdorian to notice something was wrong was mining specialist Quardin, who had been cataloguing the ship's primitive artifacts when a cabinet door opened behind him. This wouldn't have been unusual, except that cabinets don't generally open themselves, and they certainly don't reveal heavily muscled humans holding what appeared to be a mining laser, modified with spare plasma conduits and sheer human spite. Gentlemen, Tank said, his voice carrying the sort of calm that comes from waking up to find your worst enemies treating your home like a tourist attraction, I'm going to need you to stop touching my stuff. The Valdorians froze. This was understandably confusing for them, as humans were supposed to be extinct, and extinct species generally didn't speak fluent Galactic standard or point improvised weapons at your thorax. Vexum was the first to recover his composure. Impossible, you're dead. Your entire species is dead. We have the paperwork. Funny thing about paperwork, Tank replied, adjusting his grip on the modified mining laser. It's only as accurate as the people filing it, and you boys have always been a bit sloppy with your research. The standoff lasted exactly 4 seconds before Quardin made the critical error of reaching for his sidearm. Tank's improvised weapon discharged with a sound like reality tearing, and Quardin discovered that human engineering might be primitive, but primitive didn't mean ineffective. The mining laser, enhanced with 50 years of creative modifications, cut through Valdorian combat armor like it was decorative foil. Now that was just rude, Tank observed as Quardin collapsed. I was trying to have a civilized conversation. Bexton and the remaining specialist backed toward the airlock, their mandibles clicking in what Tank had learned to recognize as either laughter or abject terror. Given the circumstances, he suspected the latter. You can't be here, Vexton insisted with the sort of desperate logic of someone whose worldview was actively crumbling. We sterilized your planet. We eliminated your species. You're supposed to be dead. Yeah, about that, Tank said, keeping the weapon trained on them while reaching for his comm unit with his free hand. Here's the thing about humans. We're really, really bad at staying dead when we're supposed to. The communication that went out from Tank's ship was brief, coded, and transmitted on frequencies that the Valdorians had assumed were empty cosmic background radiation. Within minutes, similar signals began responding from across the star system, then from neighboring systems, then from mining colonies, research stations, and forgotten outposts scattered across what had once been considered pacified space. Admiral Keth'var received the reports with growing disbelief that slowly transformed into something approaching panic. Humans emerging from hidden colonies on 17 different worlds, human ships decloaking near Valdorian mining operations, human resistance cells activating after 5 decades of perfectly executed invisibility. How many? He demanded, staring at the tactical display that showed red dots appearing like a malignant rash across his territory. Current count is approaching 200 confirmed contacts, sir, Zixtel reported, his voice carefully neutral, and growing. 200? 200! We killed millions of them. Yes, sir, Apparently we missed a few. The few they had missed turned out to be considerably more resourceful than anyone had anticipated. While the Valdorians had been patting themselves on the back for a job well done, the surviving humans had been playing the longest game of hide-and-seek in galactic history. They'd built underground cities, established hidden colonies, and spent 50 years preparing for exactly this moment. Tank's ship, it turned out, was part of a network called the Lazarus Protocol, a reference that would have amused the humans and completely confused their enemies. For 5 decades, sleeper agents had been scattered throughout Valdorian space, some in hibernation, others integrated into conquered populations, all waiting for the signal that their species was ready to stop being dead. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been running a medical research station disguised as a slave labor camp on Kepler 42b. Engineer Pip Thornwell had spent 40 years as a primitive maintenance drone on a Valdorian battleship, quietly sabotaging systems and learning their weaknesses. Pilot Jackson Mercury had been hiding in the asteroid belts, mapping every Valdorian patrol route and defense installation. They had been patient, they had been thorough, and they had been absolutely furious for 50 years. The first real engagement happened at Mining Platform 7, where Tank had decided that subtlety was overrated. His ship, which the Valdorians had dismissed as junk, revealed weapon systems that should have been impossible given human technology. Plasma cannons charged by solar collectors, missile pods that launched projectiles made from compressed garbage, and shield generators that ran on what appeared to be pure human stubbornness. "Their weapons don't make sense," Vexton reported from the platform's command center as Tank's ship systematically dismantled their defenses. "The power ratios are all wrong. The targeting systems are practically medieval." "Then why are they working?" Keth'var demanded. "I don't know." This was the fundamental problem the Valdorians faced. They had spent centuries perfecting warfare to a science, creating elegant solutions to tactical problems. Humans, on the other hand, had perfected warfare to an art form of creative violence and spite-driven engineering. When your shield generators are powered by recycled life support systems, and your targeting computer is a 50-year-old gaming console running on coffee and determination, enemy countermeasures tend to be somewhat ineffective. Tank's assault on Mining Platform 7 lasted exactly 14 minutes. When it was over, the platform was intact but completely under human control, its Valdorian crew imprisoned in their own detention facilities, and Tank broadcasting a message that would have made his old drill instructors proud for its creative use of profanity and threats. "Attention Valdorian 3rd Mining Fleet," Tank's voice crackled across all frequencies. "This is Commander Marcus Rodriguez of the Human Resistance. You boys seem to have made a small error in your paperwork 50 years ago. See, you filed us under extinct, but we've been filed under really pissed off and waiting for payback. I suggest you update your records." Admiral Keth'var stared at the communication array as if it had personally insulted his ancestors. "Patch me through to him." The connection crackled with interference, whether from distance or sheer human insubordination was unclear. "So," Keth'var began, trying to project the authority that had cowed a dozen species, "you're the ghost that's been haunting my mining operation." "Ghost?" Tank's laughter carried across the void with genuine amusement. "Admiral, I'm about as solid as your species' reputation for thoroughness, which, judging by current circumstances, ain't saying much. You cannot possibly believe you can challenge the Valdorian Empire with a handful of survivors and salvaged equipment. Funny thing about beliefs, Admiral, I believed you boys had wiped out my species. I believed Earth was gone. I believed I was the last human left alive." Tank's voice carried an edge that made even battle-hardened Valdorian officers shift uncomfortably. "Turns out I was wrong about all of that. Makes a guy wonder what else might be wrong with the official story." The tactical display in Keth'var's command center was updating in real time as human forces revealed themselves across the star system. What had started as isolated contacts was rapidly becoming a coordinated rebellion. Worse, the humans were using tactics that made no sense from a military standpoint, but were proving devastatingly effective. "They're targeting our supply lines," Sub-Commander Zixtal reported. "Nothing critical, just inconvenient, forcing supply convoys to take longer routes, disrupting communication schedules, sabotaging equipment, just enough to require maintenance. Death by 1,000 cuts, Keth'var muttered. Sir, it's an old human military concept. Don't destroy your enemy outright, make their existence so miserable and expensive that they destroy themselves. The strategy was working. Valdorian forces found themselves constantly looking over their shoulders, never knowing when a dead maintenance worker might turn out to be a human saboteur, or when a routine mining operation might be interrupted by ghosts with very real weapons. The psychological warfare was perhaps even more effective than the physical attacks. The Valdorians had built their entire imperial identity around being the apex predators of the galaxy. Discovering that their greatest triumph had been built on faulty intelligence was devastating to morale. Tank ship had become the nerve center of a resistance network that shouldn't have existed. From his cramped command center, surrounded by jury-rigged equipment and systems held together by human ingenuity and sheer bloody-mindedness, he coordinated operations across dozens of star systems. "Status report," he called out to his makeshift crew, humans who had emerged from hiding places across the mining platforms and Valdorian installations. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her medical station, where she was treating wounded resistance fighters with equipment that was half Valdorian medical tech and half human improvisation. 17 more humans reported in from the Centauri system. Apparently there's an entire colony living in the asteroid mining tunnels. Engineer Thornwell's voice crackled over the comm from his position aboard a captured Valdorian frigate. "I've got their shield modulation frequencies figured out. Turns out when you design your defenses to stop sophisticated energy weapons, a good old-fashioned kinetic projectile goes right through like tissue paper. And I've got confirmation from the Outer Rim," added Pilot Mercury from his position at the sensor array. "The Kepler colonies are ready to move. 300 humans, fully armed, and they've spent 50 years turning their mining equipment into weapons." Tank allowed himself a grim smile. "Gentlemen, ladies, I think it's time to have a proper conversation with Admiral Keth'var." The final confrontation took place in the shadow of what had once been Earth's moon. The Valdorians had converted Luna into a fortress and communication hub, a symbolic victory over the conquered species. It seemed appropriate that it should also be the site of their defeat. Admiral Keth'var's flagship, the Pride of Valdor, was a magnificent vessel, 2 kilometers of advanced engineering, bristling with weapons that could crack planets and shields that could deflect small stars. It represented the absolute pinnacle of Valdorian military technology. It was opposed by a fleet that looked like it had been assembled from a junkyard sale and held together with determination and spite. Human ships of every description, converted mining vessels, salvaged warships, and craft that appeared to have been built from whatever materials were handy at the time. "Admiral," Tang's voice came through the communication array one final time, "I'm calling to discuss the terms of your surrender." Keth'var nearly choked on his breathing apparatus. "My surrender? You're outnumbered 50 to 1. Funny thing about numbers, Admiral, you might want to check your math." The tactical display updated, and Keth'var's 4 eyes widened in disbelief. The human fleet wasn't just the ragtag collection he could see, it was the tip of an iceberg. Across the system, human forces were revealing themselves from hiding places that had been invisible for 50 years, underground installations, asteroid bases, ships that had been camouflaged as debris, an entire civilization that had been playing dead. "This is impossible," Keth'var whispered. "No, Admiral, this is what happens when you assume extinction without checking for a pulse." The battle itself was almost anticlimactic. The Valdorians had spent 50 years assuming they were the only advanced military force in the region. Their tactics, their weapons, their strategies, all designed for fighting primitive species or other advanced civilizations. They had no preparation for fighting ghosts, who had spent half a century studying their weaknesses and preparing countermeasures. Human weapons that shouldn't have worked cut through Valdorian shields. Human tactics that made no sense by traditional military standards proved devastatingly effective. Human ships that looked like they were held together with prayer and profanity outmaneuvered vessels that represented centuries of advanced engineering. When the pride of Valdor's shields finally collapsed under the combined assault of 24 human vessels, Admiral Keth'var found himself staring at a communication screen showing the face of the human who had haunted his fleet for the past week. "You want to know the really funny part, Admiral?" Tank said, his scarred face split by a grin that was equal parts exhaustion and vindication. "We weren't hiding from you all these years because we were afraid. We were hiding because we were planning." "Planning what?" "This. The moment when you'd get comfortable, when you'd assume the job was finished, when you'd stop looking over your shoulders." Tang's expression grew serious. "You made one mistake, Admiral. Just one, but it was a big one." "What mistake?" Tank's grin returned, but this time it carried no humor at all. "You left witnesses." The aftermath was swift and thorough. Valdorian installations across 3 star systems found themselves occupied by humans who had supposedly been extinct for 50 years. The Empire's carefully maintained records were updated to reflect a rather significant error in their previous reports. Earth, it turned out, was very much inhabited. The underground cities and hidden colonies had grown into a thriving civilization that had spent 50 years preparing for exactly this moment. The Valdorians discovered that orbital bombardment was remarkably ineffective against a species that had learned to live like moles and fight like cornered badgers. Tank stood on the observation deck of the reclaimed lunar base, looking out at Earth, blue and green, and very much alive despite 50 years of official extinction. Dr. Vasquez joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee that had been brewed from beans grown in hidden hydroponic gardens. "So what now?" she asked. Tank accepted the coffee and took a sip. After 50 years of recycled hibernation fluid, even bad coffee tasted like heaven. Now we update the galactic records. Make sure everyone knows that reports of humanity's death have been greatly exaggerated." "And the Valdorians?" "Oh, they'll adapt. They're a practical species when they're not being genocidal. Besides," Tank's grin returned, "someone needs to operate their mining equipment while they're learning how to play nice with species they can't exterminate." The galaxy, it seemed, would need some time to adjust to the news that humans were not, in fact, extinct. The bureaucrats would need to update their files, the military strategists would need to revise their threat assessments, and the Valdorians would need to learn some rather painful lessons about the dangers of incomplete genocide. But perhaps most importantly, they would all need to remember a simple lesson that had cost the Valdorian Empire 3 star systems and their reputation for infallibility. When you're hunting humans, you better make sure they're actually dead. Because if they're not, they'll spend however long it takes planning exactly how to make you regret that oversight. And humans, as the galaxy was about to learn, were extraordinarily creative when it came to expressing their displeasure.